You know what nobody really loves dealing with? I mean, maybe that's a bit strong, and I'm sorry to my guest, but nobody really loves talking to lawyers. It's not like sort of the thing that you're dying to do. Let's say if you're building an AI product in a company or something, you don't think, oh my God, I can't wait to talk to the lawyer about this. But I actually think my guest today might make them want to do such a thing. And he helps them to do such things. He is James Desir. He is the senior corporate counsel at Progressive Insurance and one of the leaders of their responsible AI programs. And he's here today to talk about his own journey, about how he got into the responsible AI space. First, he was just at a big law firm, and then he worked for the federal government, and then he was actually at Meta, so worked at a big tech company, and now he's at Progressive Insurance. And one thing I want to stress, by the way, before he sues me, is that the claims or the views that he expresses in this episode are his. They are not necessarily the views of his employer, Progressive Insurance. So he sort of threatened me with lawsuit if I didn't say that. He didn't actually, but I don't know. One fears when a lawyer says, make sure to say this. You probably should do it, right? Anyway, our conversation is really about him and his experience trying to build and scale a responsible AI program at lots of different companies, including but not exclusive to Progressive Insurance. So we talk a lot about what effective AI governance or AI ethics or responsible AI looks like in these large organizations. We talk about how he really strives to make sure that he's not seen as just a lawyer as a blocker. That's a common trope that I kicked off this sort of intro with. No one wants to go talk to the lawyer. Why? Because they're usually blockers. So James is really intent on making sure that lawyers in the responsible AI space aren't primarily seen as blockers, but rather they're seen as thought partners who help people think about both the legal risks and the business risks and how to balance these two things. We talk a little bit about how it's different creating these kinds of AI ethics programs or responsible AI programs in a highly regulated industry like insurance versus a highly unregulated industry, let's say like big tech. We talk about how does someone in responsible AI like him prove that what they're doing is actually a value add, that they're not, again, just blockers, but that they are thought partners that are adding value to the project as a whole, so that when projects are successful, AI projects are successful, that's at least in part because the lawyers were involved. And we talk a lot about what does it look like, given that responsible AI teams and corporations are usually rather small, how can they scale, or how do they scale responsible AI practices? Not just because companies are so large and sprawling, but also because the AI is getting increasingly complex. Okay, so that's what this conversation is about. A couple of notes. Number one, as I've said before, I have a new book coming out in just 2 months, a little bit under 2 months in April. It's called The Ethical Nightmare Challenge. I'll say more about that. If you want to hear more about that book launch events, date of official publication, et cetera, then please go to my Substack, reedblackman.substack.com, sign up there for updates. If you want to support this podcast, which, by the way, I don't run ads on because I find them too annoying. If you want to support the podcast, go to Substack, do a monthly or an annual subscription. That's always appreciated. And I don't know, that's enough. That's it. That's enough about me. Let's go talk to James. Okay, so James, you're a little bit like me. You're like a wayward soul. I started in philosophy. You started in law. You're a lawyer by training, by degree, etc. But now you find yourself a leader in the, whatever you want to call it, responsible AI space, AI governance space, AI ethics space, or whatever. So I guess I want to hear first, how did you get from law to AI?
Sure. And I guess I would start by saying thanks for having me. One, I don't know if I would aggrandize myself to say leader in the AI space, but I'm part of a responsible AI legal team, RAI legal team at Progressive. My journey there is one that has been non-linear. I started in private practice where if you ever worked in big law, you understand like discovery is costly and time consuming. And so you get to understand the ins and outs of data.
I watch
And
Suits. I know. I watch Suits
just
and
like that.
the practice. So that
Just
I'm pretty
like
much a
that.
lawyer.
Yeah, basically add SVU into the mix, then you get the people dimension. But no, essentially with working in large law, big law, you get to understand litigation, technology, and data pretty intimately, especially as a young associate, which is basically a glorified doc reviewer. That sort of got me into understanding data and the power of data. And then from there, I went to my path is windy and sinewy, if you will. But relevantly, I went to the federal sector where I was in house with the Social Security Administration. And we had to have a good grasp of privacy for dealing in all matters that relate to SSN, Social Security numbers. And I also focused on some more technical sub work streams there that got basically added more arrows to my quiver for just data law in general. And then eventually I joined Meta, where I was supporting Facebook Marketplace. And you can imagine there are lots of data right questions there, amongst others. And then here I am at Progressive, where they liked my experience, I think, saw it a natural fit for this more ambiguous AI space. So even as I joined, my role was still settling in terms of its definition and scope, but predominantly I focus on RAI, and I also do some other things, mergers and acquisitions, and some marketing review.
Was there a time when you said to yourself, okay, I really want to get into the AI space? Or was it just, okay, I'm into data, I'm a data person. I guess that's why Meta hired you. You had to look through lots, or not look through literally, but do work related to lots of highly sensitive data, like social security numbers.
I think that was part of it, an irrelevant part. I never dreamt of becoming an AI lawyer per
Yeah.
se, and it's such
Yeah.
a green space. In fact, that anyone that would, as my one of my coworkers and my manager would say, is like anyone who says that they're an expert in AI is probably lying. Now maybe less, but certainly it's a green space. So that wasn't my path to intentionally target that. But Meta actually liked the fact, I think, predominantly that I was at Meta. You, as in-house counsel or product counsel, you're like a mini GC, and you got to field lots of issues very quickly. Course correction is key. And so being
Yeah.
able to issue spot, which I think most litigators, and that's predominantly the majority of my experience was in litigation. So as a litigator, I think just the ability to engage with various functions, cross-functional collaboration is key to any in-house role, but then also being able to spot things and being able to learn. But the data experience and the sensitive data that I dealt with certainly helped, I think.
Yeah, I think so. So two questions. Though. One is, how did you get something like how did you get to speak the language that engineers and data scientists and computer scientists could understand? So how, because as we all know, there's legalese and
Right.
lawyers speak legalese, non-lawyers don't speak legalese. Typically, lawyers don't speak data science, but I guess you. So how did you learn, as it were, the language to speak to them? And the second is, one of the problems I take it with being a lawyer in the space, and tell me if I'm wrong. I hear this line for an ethicist in the space is that you're a no sayer, that you're the one who says that no one wants to talk to you because you're the one who's going to say, yeah, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. That's too risky. That's a violation. That no. So, which means that even if they could understand you, if they can understand you, which is one obstacle, getting them to actually care what you have to say and actually, for lack of a better word, comply is another. So, is that something, I assume that's something you've had to manage over the years?
Yeah, I think you geek out and love it, right? Hopefully, people who work in this space are curious, intellectually curious, and humble enough to understand that there's always more to learn and that you are
If
not
it,
the most technical person. What were
Oh,
you going
right.
to say?
You're the humble one. I was going to say, usually data scientists at Meta don't strike me as most obviously the best candidates for super humble people.
I remain neutral on that, but
I'm just speculating. I'm just
I,
speculating.
I think that's probably a fair speculation. But that being said, you humble yourself to, I like
Yeah.
to call the powerful brain trust of any organization or corporate entity you work in, and try to learn and align yourself. And I think that's pretty endemic to any in-house counsel position. You really have to learn all the language, all the acronyms. Sometimes it's literally just like playing horse whisperer, learning the words to magically translate your legalese, your compliance stance, your needs,
Yeah.
and the hard no's into we just need to do this a little more intelligently, patiently, deliberately, thoughtfully.
Yeah.
So there is certainly, and that's an ongoing, I think, effort. And for me, at least, personally speaking, it's one of my
Yeah.
strategies as to be an effective counselor and thought partner is to really think about how will this message land? What do people really
Yeah.
need to know? And typically, most people don't like lawyers talking too much anyway. So, how do we condense and distill this information into digestible, actionable information that people need to action on? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's right. I've had some experience where I've had certain contracts, and I have a cousin who's an attorney, and so I had some contractual questions. And what made him good, or what made him helpful, is not that he just said, here's what the law says, and yes, no, black and white. It was more like, look, here are the legal risks, but they're risks that they need to be weighed against certain business risks. And I can't tell you what to do as the lawyer. I can tell you the degree of legal risk that is involved here. But at the end of the day, it's a business decision that you have to make, Reed. And it was his sensitivity to that fact that made me shifted my perspective in a way and how I listened. I at first, I think, went to him with seeking something like a red light, green light.
Right.
And because I think of lawyers, or at least I thought of lawyers as, these are the rules, here's how they apply. But really, I take it what made him a good, to use your word, thought partner is that he took the business opportunities or the business considerations to be relevant to the deliberation about what to do. So it wasn't just, yeah, this is what you should do. It's, you got to choose what's right for your business.
Sounds like a smart lawyer, your cousin. I would say I think that's very right. And if I can add to that a bit, thought partnership as an in-house counsel means that you can't just be the blocker. You
Right.
can't be the fun police,
It'll
be the
never come
force
back
of
to you,
no.
right?
You have to say, like I said earlier, a bit. You have to think about reframing things to help the business side of house understand how you're really invested in their success. And
Yeah.
frankly, you are as in-house counsel, right? Inherently, you can't your results aren't necessarily, so tangible as, or easily traceable to say, I prevented all these harms. You can't really
Right.
prove that, but you can prove up and show your value and impact added by showing how many projects you enabled, how many complex quagmires you navigated and found the best line through.
So actually, I want to talk more about that. So actually, there's two things. One is, did you find that in order for the data scientists, et cetera, to listen to you and take you seriously, was it because they were mandated by someone in the hierarchy, someone higher up than both of you, that said, hey, data scientists, you got to listen to what the lawyers say? So to what extent was it, like, start listening to me because they have to, they're required to by top-down policy or whatever? So
Right.
let me ask that question first. Then
Yeah, and that's a big one without getting into sensitive or proprietary information.
Yeah.
I think I can answer that generally and just say I'm fortunate or unfortunate to work in a regulated space for
Yeah.
a heavily regulated entity, a big player in its field, in its sector. And there, for us and me and people on my team, the work is easily deriving its authority from regulations. There's lots of
Right.
regs beholden upon large companies that delve into consequential spaces. So starting with healthcare, financial services, insurance, and so forth, labor and employment, we're seeing more activity there. But it's really defined by regulations. Regulations call, say, in the insurance space for disciplinarily diverse, responsible AI or AI governance program for AI systems, both acquired or homegrown. That means we're probably in business
Yeah.
to have some lawyers there to make sure they're interpreting and navigating all these
Yeah.
tricky compliance spaces.
Yeah, so it's back in the day, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago, I thought that when I was trying to think about what industry is going to lead the way, at least outside of tech, is going to lead the way in responsible AI, and I had predicted healthcare. And the reason I had predicted healthcare is that they already speak the language of ethics. They have ethics committees, they have IRBs, institutional review boards. There's a long history of medical ethics literature, and so I thought they would lead the way. And to my surprise, one, they're behind everybody, and also to my surprise is that places like financial services and insurance have led the way for exactly the reasons that you said, which is, well, for banks especially, I guess, insurance as well. They've been doing model risk governance forever, and they've got regulators crawling all over them. And so they have this culture, this history of, hey, we have to take these data tools extremely seriously and make sure that we're compliant, because if we're not, the regulators are they're going to be knocking at our door anyway, and we better have good answers for them. So it sounds like you've really benefited in terms of the influence you're able to have by being a member of that kind of company.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Yeah, regulated entities, even though healthcare is one of them, but the ones that deal in big data to perhaps
Right.
make money more heavily, they're the ones that
Yeah.
regulators like to look at more closely. And you certainly get to be a part of the dialogue. And most in-house counsel, I can't speak for other companies and really not disclosing anything about my own, but I
Sure.
think a fair number of in-house counsel in their work scope are usually called to some degree to be engaged in the regulatory process for comment, right? Whenever there's a proposed
Yeah.
bill, because these regulators are important parts of the legal ecosystem, I like to say, but they aren't necessarily the data scientists or super genius
Yeah.
experts in the tech space. They're just beholden to their constituents. And they try to some degree elicit comment and feedback from perhaps legal teams at these companies or regulatory engagement teams to see how things might operationalize, which is a whole
Yeah.
workspace in and of itself. But so it is a interesting role to be in-house in a new, ambiguous, ever constant, quickly evolving AI space.
Yeah. Okay, I want to go back to the ROI stuff, the return on investment on
Mhm.
responsible AI. So there's some things that people say in this space that annoy the hell out of me. Oh, AI ethics and responsible AI makes you more innovative. And that just strikes me as maybe just conceptually confused because part of the point of responsible AI is to stop some subset of innovation, specifically the irresponsible subset of innovation. So you are trying to close down certain kinds of innovation. If there were no kinds of innovation that needed to be shut down, we wouldn't need responsible AI programs. So it just seems to be like it's salesy to the point of conceptual confusion. That's one thing. But the other thing is, on the other side of that, and I guess this is true in risk generally, but it's hard to prove your value because you're successful when the bad shit doesn't happen. But it's hard or impossible to point to presence of an absence or something like that, right? It didn't happen. The bad stuff didn't happen. And that's a lot different than showing the good stuff did happen. Yeah, can you say more about how companies that you've worked for or you or people have tried to demonstrate to people outside of the space the value of responsible AI? And yeah, how do you
Yeah, sure.
explain to them, no, there's real value here and make it real and not just feel good?
Me personally, I think in my in-house experience, which has been like pretty much half my career now, I quickly learned that you can't really prove the negative. This didn't
Yeah,
happen. I like to focus on the positive reframe and think about successful enablement. What does a return on your investment for whatever AI system look like? And that's when you help teams understand that you add value in helping them be successful. Because what does it mean to launch a new model or deploy a new AI use case where it's so high risk and so dangerous that not only does it fail, doesn't perform as expected, hallucinates left and right, or whatever
yeah,
purpose isn't achieved by its intended design. Additionally, you might attract bad PR and all these things. Education is very important in this space too, and
yeah,
goes like all throughout all different levels of leadership and across different business functions. But really, one thing that we like to do for fun, and I think I can speak to this safely because it's just an educational device that we
yeah,
deploy. It's called Hot Tech, Hot Mess. And I think it's akin
yeah,
to, I had the pleasure of reading your forthcoming book. I didn't
yeah,
read the first one, but the ethical
yeah.
nightmare
Don't worry about it.
challenge. I think you might relate to this, but we in our hot tech, mess segments, like when we do our roadshow or educate different partners and different business units on the value of responsible AI and the need for governance, we like to
Yeah,
pull from like real life examples. I have fun looking at the other pain points or really brutal learning moments, and they're out there for many in different realms. I'm sure a lot of people learn about, I've heard, at least in my industry, lawyers, about a lawyer that relies on AI to produce a
yeah,
brief or something like that, and half the case
yeah,
sites are fabricated and things like that. So using those use cases as very real examples of hot tech, hot mess, what could work well, what worked well in this
yeah,
case, other scenarios where there's human in the loop interventions, and maybe you
yeah,
have some aerial imaging feedback that's going to for disaster relief to FEMA, for example. Great use
yeah,
of the innovation, great use of the technology, and great use of thoughtful, sensible guardrails to always make sure that output is vetted by an actual human being, right? And is verified. Using hot devices like hot tech, hot
But
mess.
tell me more about the hot, I want to hear more about hot tech hot mess. I also
Sure.
still want to hear more. I have a question about the ROI stuff, but what does it look like to? Is it a game? You play a game called Hot?
It's an engagement device. For instance, like if me or my team were doing a presentation, it's a segment like perhaps at the end, we're like, okay, and now onto hot tech, hot mess, where you can literally speak to a public blurb about some use case, give a little synopsis, and then have people say, perhaps on the video call like this, be responsive in the chat. What are your thoughts? Hot tech, hot mess. Give them a second to elaborate, deliberate. And
Yeah.
it's interesting. It really turns on the engagement, I find,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's not really directly focusing people into hypothetical spaces about, say, the doomsday scenario of their
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
proposal for their project. But it's easier for
Yeah.
them to apply the same logic tools that they probably still should be using for their own projects, but to think about the
Yeah.
negative case outcomes for some other
I see. I see.
scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you give them you give them the case, you give them the technology or the AI that's involved, and they have to
Right.
think about how can this be a mess.
Exactly. Or
Right.
why
I
is
see.
this
And
hot? Is it a hot tech or a hot mess? Or good
can it
touch,
be
bad
both?
touch?
Can
I
it be both,
think
right?
that it's always, I guess, to some degree, it is a game, and that me and my team decide what we think is hot tech or hot mess to the group.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe that's where the
Okay.
education comes in,
Yeah.
so to
Yeah. Yeah.
speak, and encouraging and discouraging behavior as needed.
Right.
But yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there is no right or wrong answer, of course.
Got it.
Right.
So this is now I see the connection with the ethical nightmare challenge because of course part of that is to first identify what are the ethical nightmares that pertain to this particular AI. Or, yeah. So we're aligned. Yeah, that sounds right. Let's go back to the enablement thing, the positive framing. So you could say this. Maybe this is going to be a little bit technical, but not technical, but whatever. Anyway, you could say, hey, I worked with this team who deployed this AI solution and it made X millions of dollars. So that's how I proved my worth. But I take it the pushback is something like, yeah, but what was the nature of your contribution? Like, would the model not have been deployed otherwise? Do we know what role you played in the rollout of that tech or that model, that AI solution, whatever it is, such that part of that ROI is attributable to your contribution? How do you demonstrate that? It's got to be like, we made X million dollars, but were it not for me and my contribution, we wouldn't have made that.
I think, yeah, it does make sense. And that's like where it gets a bit more to the business, right?
Yeah.
To focus on the numbers. As in-house counsel, I certainly think about numbers, but usually in the negative sense in terms of the consequences of non-compliance or critical failure. I also
Yeah.
think about things qualitatively. So for me, really, the best I can do as in-house counsel in any given scenario to prove my contribution is really to focus on it launched and it is
Yeah.
still surviving, it's still deployed, and we skated successfully by all these other minds, if you will. Yeah, so it is to some degree like I'm fortunate too that I personally, as of now, today, don't feel that I need to prove that every day.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
you do need to educate people to help them understand the need for governance and compliance, but it's easy discussion when you start from the vantage point or the starting point of the law
Yeah.
requires this at minimum and
Yeah.
therefore I am here. But
Yeah.
we do, as in-house counsel, most companies, their in-house counsel are financially invested in the company's success as well. So if you're
Yeah.
just a blocker, you're not doing it right. And while it might sound like lip service to business partners or to other practitioners in the space, that legal counsel and RAI, we like to enable and optimize technological development, but it is the truth. It's like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think like these data scientists and these other more technical enablement partners, they understand that when you one speak their language, you gain more faith. When you're invested in understanding the use cases, when you're maybe a
Yeah.
natural geek like some people here, you prove up the goodwill and show them that you're actually thinking thoughtfully and not just trying to get them to
Yeah.
deploy, launch, and hopefully
Yeah.
remain as compliant as possible so everyone wins.
I suppose I'm gonna rephrase it maybe, and you tell me if the rephrasing is inapt. There's a way in which I'm asking you that question about how do you show that you're contributing in the right kind of way, and it's almost like me asking for a kind of empirical research that proves the counterfactual, blah, 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 that runs the counterfactual and controls for the experiment, blah, blah. And that's just a burden of proof that you're not going to reach in this context because no one's doing
1000%.
that fine-grained research. And so it's almost like inference to the best explanation, or maybe something like a charitable interpretation of what's going on, because you say, look, we know that me and my team were involved in the development and release and monitoring of this AI solution. We know that it went to market. We know that it did well. It did what it was supposed to do. We also know that there haven't been any incidents. And how can we best explain how that happened? Now, one theory is the legal team was there, the responsible people were there. And even though we were in the meetings and we talked and we said something, we had literally had nothing to do with the fact that it rolled out without incident and there haven't been any incidents. Or you can think, no, probably the smart people in the room who contributed that conversation had some role in how the AI was developed and so played a role in how it was, in the fact that we haven't had catastrophe. So it's an inference to the best explanation, or what's the best interpretation of this data, that they had no role to play or some role to play. And I think I started off saddling you with too great a burden of proof that you couldn't reach unless you had a bunch of, I don't know, scientists running controlled experiments and all, but that's not plausible. Anyway, so how does that sound like as a capitulation?
Yeah, I do think it's highly analogous. It's close, but again, the most I can say is it's regulated. It's a regulated space, so
Yeah.
therefore it's a process that needs to happen. And
Yeah.
at some companies, depending on how serious they are, they have adequate investment for their responsible AI governance or their
Yeah.
AI trust committees or whatever. And then some companies, again, without disclosing anything proprietary, those
Sure.
lawyers are more involved. Most in-house counsels, they serve as first, they're substantive matters, right? Subject matter experts for whatever realm they're in, but they typically serve as a connective tissue just the same for connecting, flagging, making the flags like, oh, you probably need to talk to this department. They should have visibility in this as well. And the value becomes seen more readily if you're operating in multiple realms, not only as a
Yeah.
subject matter expert for, say, responsible AI or a subject
Yeah.
matter expert, but then if you're also connecting the dots for people, looping in other stakeholders in as needed, I think your value becomes more apparent as well. Again, for me, fortunately, I don't feel the pressure, or maybe I should be thinking
Yeah.
about it differently, but
Yeah.
I can say it's a joint ship effort. And so the players, the strategic thinkers in this space, they talk a lot. And so if your name's thrown around, I trust that's good enough. If people are
Yeah.
saying,
Yeah.
better call James.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about, I don't know, challenges. I've worked with a number of clients where it's very difficult. Again, in a regulated industry, I think it's easier. In some respects, but actually it's harder in others. Let me clarify. First of all, getting a sort of top-down responsible AI program implemented is a big lift across, we're talking about a Fortune 500 company, it's a big lift. So number one, it's a big lift, and so I want to know, what are the sort of roadblocks you ran into, or what are the obstacles? What did overcoming them look like? That's one question. And then the other thing that is hard, I've seen at least, especially in financial services, that they already have a way of doing things like model risk governance. And so they're like, what do we need responsible AI people for? We've been doing this stuff for decades. We know how to do model risk governance. So go away. We don't need your new anything, policy, method, metrics. And so it can be a harder sell. That's one reason why, that's one obstacle that I've run into a number of times with clients who are in financial services, where there's just not political alignment because they think we don't need another team around here. We've already been doing this. Anyway, so that's, do with
Right,
that what you
right.
will.
I'll do my best. I will say this, that I think you have your philosophy background, so I'm sure you're familiar with Parsons' theory of specialization,
Yeah,
where
yep,
there
go
are
on.
these like the A, B, C, D quadrants for different functions, and within those subgroups of A, B, C, D. So that specialization, while it might be, say, in the AI space, true that there's already existing risk mitigation boards or committees or work streams, I do think specializing adds value and that it is distinct. If you get to live and breathe this stuff, you have a little
Oh, yeah.
different competency,
I agree with,
and so
sorry, yeah, no, I think
yeah.
that's right, but getting them to see that. So it's one thing for it to be the fact that there is value for the responsible AI people to add to the existing to people who've already been doing things like model risk governance, but it's a whole different thing for them to appreciate that fact.
That's the magic of working. My company's, I think, 70K plus employees and growing.
Yeah.
And you literally at that, and we're not like a super heavily staffed RAI team, right? And so
Yeah.
to some degree, my work is embedded, but I do think at any large company, you will have that challenge, but the specialization is almost by design a necessity, right? Because what is good in one scenario where people focus on just that one space, while it might look and feel similar to other spaces, I think you have to educate them to first understand it is a different space. And while it might look and feel similar to some of the work done by just general risk management teams, the goals are different and therefore the considerations are different. And the laws are to some degree different too. But the efficiency gained from people being able to focus in this space more exclusively, I think helps bridge that divide
Yeah.
a bit more. But constantly, education, I would say, is one of, to continue answering your question about challenges in this space, like things as simple as I say there's a semantic divide sometimes with this AI stuff. Regulators themselves quibble about what is AI. They like to be
Yeah.
over inclusive and define things like more lower ordered computing, like machine learning or algorithmic processes, and pull that into the mix. And there's reasons for that that make sense. That, for example, can even in and of itself be naturally offensive to, say, a data scientist, right, who has more of a tight definition that focuses on more generative or agentic use cases, right?
Yeah.
So education is really the name of the game for, I think, any
Yeah.
in-house counsel, and bridging that semantic divide, saying, hey, to data scientist A, while you do not consider this AI, regulators do, and we're beholden to them. And
It's a good
so
argument.
it's the law.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's a
Right.
good
Would you?
argument,
Right.
but it's the truth. And it's putting people in that mindset, helping them understand the brass tacks of it. Look, I don't think it's maybe, for instance, like these lower ordered forms of computing, while they're in scope for regulatory purposes, and therefore we need to have some compliance standard, maybe it informs your compliance strategy, right? So people, like, I
Yeah.
think, lend you favor and goodwill when you help them understand that you're thinking about the nuances and not just trying to
Yeah.
overburden their work streams.
Okay, so a couple of things about like where you fall into the mix. A lot of times for responsible AI teams, they primarily serve as a kind of risk board to which teams escalate high risk use cases. But it sounds like you're a lot more, you're not doing that, or maybe you are doing that as well, but you're more embedded, you're working with the dev team. So before it gets to the point of we need to escalate this, or so that they don't need to escalate it, it sounds like you or someone on your team gets embedded in the development process itself.
I won't get into progressive specifics, but I can
Yeah, fair.
broadly
Okay, yeah.
say that based on my in-house counsel experience, course correction is key. And sometimes it's easier to right side a sinking ship when there's only 10% of water on board, if that makes sense. So
I
I
follow the
like to,
metaphor. Yes, yes.
yeah, for me, strategically, I think it's smart to be embedded early in the, even as soon as the ideation stage,
Yeah,
or if you're dealing with, say, third-party vendors, because a lot of, I should say, what underscores a lot of what I'm talking about is, from my regulatory space, at least as it pertains to my company and its family of services, yeah, you need to be responsible for your vendors as well. So it's not just like
yeah,
the homegrown solutions that need this treatment, but it looks different, this level of involvement. What does that mean for a third party that doesn't want to show you their secret sauce or their black box and
yeah,
the ins and outs? Regulations might codify concepts like transparency and explainability, and maybe it looks like crafting certain agreements, leading in the contractual language for your compliance piece there. It looks different in different scenarios. Sometimes, again, as in-house counsel, you also, you have many hats, right? And so
yeah,
sometimes that might mean looking like a para HR professional when you're working on policies and things like that, to help people even understand how to use the AI tools available to them within the company, right? But so it looks different and takes on different forms. For me, I like being embedded, and I think I always
yeah,
will strive to be for whatever workspace, AI or anything else. If you're
yeah,
supporting a product or a legal team, it
yeah,
would do you well to make sure you can show them that you can add value early, and
yeah,
typically add more value early. For instance, like with the
yeah,
contract piece, if you're contracting, it's probably much better for a team to have the governance go be applied to their then intended target or whatever tool they're trying to
yeah,
acquire early, instead of go through the contract process and have it millions of dollars shelled out for something only to find out that, oh no, that will never work, we will never that will never see
yeah,
the
yeah,
light of day, it's way
yeah,
too
sure.
risky, and frankly our leadership doesn't like it. I
Yeah,
don't like being the voice of no. I like being the voice of, yeah, but maybe like this.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
much easier to say that at first base than at third.
Okay, so this might be a final question or nearing a final question, but I guess I have a question about scalability. So one of the problems that I see a lot of is that responsible AI teams are very small typically. And if you're talking about a company with say 70,000 plus employees and growing, scaling that risk, those risk assessments or that yes on the condition, I guess the question is something like, how do you think about scaling that? How does that scale? And what I've seen in people I've worked with is that they can do that because they're not doing that much AI. But Also, they're also seeing AI adoption increasing. And so they're like, we're going to become a bottleneck, especially for the people who are on the risk board, but even the ones who are embedded as
Right.
well, because they can't multiply themselves. And so it seems to me that as the AI adoption increases, even if it's just generative AI adoption, let alone AI agents, you're talking about huge scale for a tiny team that can't get involved in every single deployment of AI. It's just not going to be feasible. So I guess my sort of broadly put, how do you think about what it looks like to scale responsible AI given
Right.
a
Right.
relatively small RAI team?
Right. Like to use your ENC challenge team scenario, I don't know if I'm using the terminology correctly,
Yeah,
but
EC
say
team and
in
Lightning
your,
Challenge team,
yeah,
sure.
based on, yeah, the ENC team, I like to think of for scalability, there being a need for multiple layers of ENC teams, right? So maybe there's
Yeah,
one at the top that maybe might set the vision and things like
yeah,
that. And then at lower levels, there's as you go lower for scalability, you probably need multiple layers. So people focusing more specialization on strategy, big ticket
yeah,
decisions, or what they define as hot tech and what they define as
yeah,
hot mess, and
yeah,
then
yeah, yeah,
yeah, and then lower ordered teams to operationalize it. Because
yeah,
scalability is a challenge, and I think, frankly, in a constantly evolving space, it will always be a challenge. In a constantly
yeah,
evolving
yeah,
company and growing company, it will always be a challenge,
yeah,
right? So it's something that keeps me employed to creatively think
yeah,
through the solutions for, but certainly like to think of there being more than just one ENC team. You can think of a collective, but I do think for operationalization, most people have to have people focusing on things that they can efficiently resolve. So like people that are more on the ground or field
yeah, yeah,
workers,
yeah,
if you will, like the data developers and employers, maybe the strategy there could be a combination of training and like model reviews, if you will. I can say as a product counselor, things like that in the past, like having teams come in and on some cadence, right? Interface with
yeah,
some level of team for maybe the more rote or safe things that can efficiently get approved and reviewed quickly, great. Maybe for complex things, having people maybe who are entrusted to have the
yeah,
strategic vision or hold positions of power where they can see how multiple components interact with an organization, higher levels of leadership, maybe they should
yeah,
focus on perhaps the riskier models and use cases. So I think it varies. The how it looks will
yeah,
inevitably take different shapes based on a company and its needs. But I do think I like what I'm liking about this, the industry, at least as my company is regulated, is that the fact that there's a notion that these governance committees and RAI teams need to be disciplinarily diverse. So not just legal, not
yeah,
just
yeah,
data
yeah,
science, just also marketing, also all sorts of other orgs. So I like that one that helps ensure that there's more voices and plurality of voices to find the line of best
yeah,
fit for everyone
yeah,
and better aligned to business risk tolerance. But yeah, but I also think enshrined in the regs that I interface with most, I have to interface with all of them, frankly, because
yeah,
even though my there's a core insurance spaces, we also have employees and there's laws incumbent upon us there. But say focusing on more of the business generating stuff, there's also this concept of proportionality. The national NAIC, National Association of Insurance Commissioners, they
yeah,
have this concept of proportionality. So they appreciate that there needs to be some business flexibility to deal with different levels of risk
yeah,
differently. And so
yeah,
that
yeah,
there naturally has to be some deference for the companies that need to figure it out.
yeah,
But it naturally leads to more creative resolutioning in this space and different companies, depending on their actual investment into the RAI space, I think
yeah.
you will see. And then, frankly, I had the pleasure of meeting you at one such space, the RAI conference, RAI by Notre Dame conference,
Yeah.
or RAI by Notre Dame by IBM.
It
That
was the
conference,
IBM. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
IBM. It's the IBM like the Notre Dame Ethics Lab sponsored by IBM. Something. I don't. Whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
focusing on RAI. So I
Yeah,
just
yeah,
remember
yeah.
my calendar, I blocked it for the day, RAI by IBM by Notre
Yeah,
Dame.
yeah.
But that a lot of big companies there, I won't name
Yeah.
names, but there are a lot of big ones there. And you were the keynote speaker, which I appreciated. But there are a lot of big companies focusing on in this space, investing lots of money. And so it was well attended. And you saw in that space, there are academics,
Yeah.
there were lawyers, there were senior tech people, leads, and as well as chief information. I think it was the chief information officer for what's the big finance? I don't deal in money. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah. So I think you're seeing a lot of investment in the space, and you're also seeing attendant to that investment in a multidisciplinary approach. And so I think it's to some degree naturally taking on this form. The
Yeah.
regs kind of steer companies to that direction, but I think smart companies would do well to continue to invest in that space.
So let me ask you another question about where things are going, because everyone is talking about AI agents now. They're phenomenally complicated, sort of AI engineered systems. The way that I at least think about AI agents is that you've got something like an LLM at the center of it, and you ask your LLM to perform some task or to achieve some goal, as it were, and it, quote unquote, figures out what other pieces of software it needs to draw from, whether it's the internet or enterprise software, databases, et cetera. And then it does the quote unquote reasoning and figures out what to do. And then it's supposed to deliver you the grand answer, or in some cases, do the thing, perform the task that it's supposed to perform. This creates lots of complexity to the risk landscape because you've got not only the risks attendant to that particular LLM, but also to all the software that it's connected to and all the interactions among that software, blah, blah, blah. So I guess my question is, how are you thinking about AI agents and the risk landscape?
I'm thinking about it a lot
Yeah.
because it is certainly here. And I also think about it, and frankly, to harken back to one of my earlier comments about the educational device, hot tech, hot mess. I
Yeah.
remember one such session speaking to a real life scenario where I think it was, I mean, I probably shouldn't name the company, but a big, large company, one of the foundational models, if you will, their agentic chatbot was breezing through the security checks and human verification checks, right? And saying,
Yeah.
I am not a bot, said the bot. And so there
Yeah.
you already have service level agreement violations, platform agreement
Yeah.
violations, and perhaps a liability minefield. Should
Yeah.
everything go wrong,
Yeah.
someone can look to that one point in time and see that as an originating sin, if you will. And so
Yeah.
I think about agentic in that way, in that it represents a cluster of risks and not just one particular risk. But that being said, I think the as agentic AI is still an evolving space. Now people are being more mindful, thinking about, or there's simple ordered agentic AI, which is basically like a beefed up LLM, right? That can
Yeah.
do things within the defined parameters, maybe like in-house for a company, tools that facilitate various processes, right? But when you think about more in the wild agentic AI, that's where I think the risks get extra complicated because then they can breach the wall of violating other people's terms and conditions, not caring, pursuing world
Yeah.
domination anyway. And so I think the agentic, I'm kidding about the world domination. Hopefully that never happens, right? I do love Terminator though. But I do think with agentic AI, we need to be mindful to commensurately invest in the space and think even more expansively and creatively. These ethical nightmare teams, like that's defining the hot messes, that's finding the hot messes,
Yeah.
and first like to even readily address them. And realistically, you can only do so much. But to even
Yeah.
readily address them, you need to have the space and courage to think about all the unforeseen externalities, the negative outcomes that can
Yeah.
forecome, to even just try to have a fighting chance. But I'm curious to think about what you think about agentic AI just the same. What does it
Yeah.
represent for you when you set some challenges?
It's insane how complex the risk landscape gets, as I said earlier, because you've got so many points of failure. If you want a really powerful AI, a really powerful agent, then give it access to lots of stuff, right? The more tools, the more software, the more data it has access to, the more stuff it can do, all else equal. But if you connect it to all those things, you get all that power, but you also get all these potential points of failure, right? You've never had this software interact with this software, interact with this software. You could have cascading failures or a domino effect, right? So you can have one thing go slightly wrong in this tool, and then it has redounding, I don't know, continuous cascading effects down the line as the LLM
Sure.
processes that data. You could have systemic or emergent risks that people don't think too much about. There I'm thinking about, you could have individually good basketball players, whatever, but one likes a fast game and one likes a slow game. And so they don't make a good team, even though they're individually good. So you could have AI agents that are individually good, but as a team, it's a mess.
Exactly.
And so
Right.
I just think there's so much complexity. That's the first thing to say. And the second thing to say is, there's lots to say actually, but people are talking about autonomy of AI agents. And there's one thing that people do that I've seen some people do, and I've told them to stop, please stop doing that, is they start defining kinds of autonomy, different levels or kinds of autonomy they can give to an AI. But the thing is, the kind of autonomy doesn't map well to the level of risk for that agent, right? So you could have X kind or level of autonomy, and it's totally fine in this use case, and it's a total nightmare in this other case. And then on the other hand, you have this other kind or level of autonomy that's bad in that case and good in this other case. So you can't map from one-to-one kind of autonomy to a level of risk. The level of risk is always going to be use case, context specific. And then the question becomes, to me, okay, what's a sort of dynamic, flexible, rapid way where we can do these sort of case-specific risk assessments for levels of autonomy? And that's when I think we have ethical nightmare challenge teams or ENC teams, because that's what they're meant. They understand the context of development and deployment of the AI, of that particular agent. So they're in a good place to say, yeah, we can think of this thing as having, if you like, 3 levels of autonomy. At each level of autonomy, we can identify what I would call ethical nightmares, what you would call hot mess, and then we can engage in appropriate remediations. That's how I think about it.
I think that's right for me, at least. That feels right to hear that. And I think it was very similar to my mindset on it. I think to put it differently, essentially as the nightmares expand and compound and expound and exponentiate and rebound, I think you're saying, echo back, whatever, they come from all angles, but we need to commensurately continuously invest in the space. Like more complex, ordered technology requires more specialization of people. So maybe it means more human-in-the-loop interventions and not necessarily checking for outputs, but maybe at strategic points, right? And it might look different for different scenarios, but I think as the risk grows, hopefully for you and I, we get to continue to be voices in this game and contribute our thoughts to making sure things don't just realize the ethical nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great line to end on, but I'm going to have to say it. You may have denied at the beginning of this conversation. You continue to be a leader in the space.
Oh, thank you. I'll say with that, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, James. This has been great. Thanks, everyone, for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I want to thank a few people who make this all possible. Delano Alexander, he's my producer. He does such an amazing job on everything that he touches. Garrett Lang is the sound engineer. That's honestly, he's too good for me. Athmia Jairam has joined us recently. He's helping us find the best guests to bring onto this podcast. And Ashley Wassilenko helps us organize all this, get people on the schedule, get people's bios, headshots, and really keeps the train on the track. So thanks, guys. Really appreciate all the hard work you do.